Hello everyone, my name is Uislei Orlando, and in today's presentation, I will show the key updates on feeding PIC breeding herd. In my presentation, I'm going to focus on changes in genetic that is impacting on the way that we're feeding the maternal lines. So in my presentation, the first part, I'm going to cover the improvements in genetic. So we moved in 1975, focus in basically a simple program based in lean, growth, and feed efficiency, to doing something more complex in the 90s, like in the 95, focus also in litter size. Why? We need more piglets per cell. We need to dilute costs. We need to be more productive and more economic. More recent, and in the 2020, basically, we have a program more sophisticated based on lifetime reproductivity, and also we introduce robustness in the meat quality. So why this is important, or we should focus on this? Genetic change. The sows that we have today is different than the sows that we have years ago. So the first part of my presentation, I'm going to cover nutrition and feeding of breeding herd, focus, and gilts. So we call the 4 elements for a good gilt developing program that includes in starting about age at first breeding, age at first pubert, and number of heat, and the last, not least important, body weight at first breeding. And speaking about the age at first breeding, PIC still recommended as a minimum 200 days and preferable to do not breed in over 225 days. Age at first breeding, we recommend not be older than 195 days of age. So in terms of heat, we recommend to inseminate in the second heat, and only in the third heat inseminate those light. And speaking about the body weight, we need to focus that our minimum body weight at first breeding recommended is 135 kilos. However, the focus should be maximize the insemination, and about 80% of the gilts inseminated in this range, 135 kilos to 160 kilos. And of course, we can breed in about above 160 kilos, about 20%. However, we need to focus on this body weight because we know this is one project conducted by our partners in Brazil, Agroceres PIC, who basically scale a group of 2,500 gilts individually at breeding, and they divide this groups into one group that represent about 70% that were breeding in the range 135 kilos to 160 kilos, as you can observe here in the graph on the left. So, and about 30% of these animals, they were inseminated above 160 kilos. And we can observe that as heavier they were at the first breeding, they came to farrow in the heavier category. And the graph in the right side, we're seeing basically those animals, as much as they came, they came heavier at farrowing, they lose more weight during the first farrowing. So that's important because we're seeing that heavier gilts will turn in a heavier cell, and then we'll lose more weight in during lactation. So here in these two graphs, we can observe the genetic progress for growth. And the graph on the left side is represented the genetic potential for growth for our terminal lines. In the graph on the right side is basically the genetic potential for growth for our maternal lines. And here we can observe for the both maternal and terminal lines, PIC selected to be faster in growth. And why? because basically PIC is turning the next generation of pigs, the pro gene, more more capacity to grow faster compared with the previous generation. Why? Because we have more piglets, we have a hyperprolific cells, and getting more pigs, we need to accelerate their growth and during the win to finish period, and do not to avoid it to have a super high density pigs on the win to finish. So here in this slide, basically it's one modeling that we use the genetic potential that I presented in this slide before, and basically we calculate the weight at 210 days of age for those gutes that actually exist in genetic nucleus form in the year of 2012, that represent the gutes in the field in the year of 2015. So this is the bar here in red. However, we also flag or highlight here in blue what happened in the nucleus farm in the year of 2018 that represent the gutes that we have in field on the year of 2021. So we can observe basically that gutes in about 7 years, they change in their growth or their body weight at first breeding in about 7.6%. And first, on average, it does not look like a big change. But unfortunately, I always refer to this, pigs does not understand average. So the more important to know here, it's actually the number of gutes that is bred or that were bred above 160 kilos, those that represent heavy gutes. And we can see here that the number of gutes that were breeding above 160 kilos in the year of 2015, representing another red part, that basically was 11%. However, on this gutes from last year, 2021, those gutes that were inseminated above 160 kilos represent about almost 37% of the gutes. So first point here, we have more heavier gutes in the field today. So getting heavier gutes in the field, what we can observe in this graph, we create and based on modeling the body weight on average for the sows herd for a normal farm, using the body weight at first breeding as 144 kilos. We can estimate that the body weight from the herd is about 189 kilos. However, if we use the body weight from 2021 that is represented here in blue, we will note that the body weight from the sows herd changing, and now it's 201 kg. What is the importance of this? When we create or design the nutrition program for PIC embryos in the year of 15, we use basically the information on the sows herd is in around the 200 kilos. That probably given us a kind of margin in our nutritional program. However, using the most recent body weight for gutes, about 155 kilos, maybe we don't have any margin anymore because we're just about those 200 kilos on the sows herd. As I mentioned before, it's modeling, it's not real numbers. We are taking the genetic potential to estimate the body weight on the sows herd. However, in the gray bar here, we can observe data from two systems, one in North America that represent about 2,000 gutes, and another one in South America that we collected also individual body weight on gutes and then multiple pairs. And we can observe that the number is 206 kilos. That might be showing us that the modeling is strong enough that differences is not that much. In between the modeling and the real data. And paying attention that the GUT's body weight on the blue and gray, they are exactly the same. So what we learn here, GUTs are heavier, and GUTs heavier will be representing heavier sows and heavier that will continue being heavier. So my team is working on a project to understand about growth curve during gestation. So in this graph over here, let's pay an attention on first on the red part on the left. So in this graph, we divide in 3 periods: the first 30 days, the day 30 up to day 90, and from day 90 to day 112. The colored box represent periods in accordance with their periods, being the blue one GUTs, the gray will be P1, and then the purple with the older cells, the P5 plus. So the black line, it's 5.9 megacalories of metabolizable energy that represent the PIC recommendation for ideal cells and GUTs. So what we will learn in this graph is the growth curve of these animals will be showing us every time we have boxes above this black line represent that cells will not be feeding in accordance with their energy requirement for maintenance. And you can observe here that the P4 and P5 plus, as representing the shadow area with this square, in the late gestation, they will not be feeding in accordance with their maintenance. This is assuming the GUTs inseminate on average with 144 kilos. That means in the past, maybe that will not be a concern feeding as a PIC recommendation. As I mentioned before, we created this to be 200 kilos on average, and we're speaking about animals that was estimating about 180-90 kilos. However, using the information or the estimation of body weight at first breeding of the year of 2021, last year, basically we're going to observe that we have heavier GUTs and heavier animals, and then these 3 areas shadow here in gray will represent what happened with their sows, how they are being fed in gestation. So we can observe that the old sows, P5 plus, will be feeding limited, even in early gestation. In the mid-gestation, the P4 and P5 will be limited in energy. And in the P2 plus will be fed below their requirement for maintenance in late gestation. So wrapping up about GUTs, what do we know? We have heavier GUTs today. They have a fast genetic potential to grow faster compared with the previous generation of GUTs. So we still recommend do not limit feeding, do not create stress in the feeding program for GUTs. However, we recommend to be careful on designing to do not formulate in the diet with a high density energy, neither high density amino acids, because this we're going to promote a faster growth, and this faster growth is different than the fast growth that I'm speaking before, the faster growth by genetic. We don't want to have a promoting by nutrition, artificial growth, and create a heavier GUTs and a heavier sows. So another important point, and by this reason, we recommend to formulate a diet in amino acids in about 97% of the requirement for a GUTs, a commercial GUTs, or it means the GUT that is going to be marketed as commercial pigs. However, it's important to adequate the macro minerals and trace minerals and also vitamins. It's a future matter. They're going to be retaining for 5 or plus or more periods. We need to provide a booster of vitamins and trace mineral to promote a good structure and promoting a good future for this important category. Another point important is understand about body weight at first breeding. We know that it's hard to have a scale. It's not practical to have a scale in farms. Honestly, I have been traveling in many countries, and to be honest, accepted research farms, it's hard to find farms that have a scale and use a scale to monitor the body weight. However, PIC promotes to use the tape to estimate body weight. The tape is not perfect, but the tape is our best tool. The tape will help us to understand over periods how is the change in the body weight for at first breeding. So moving to talking about one project, I'm going to talk about one project that is in the pipeline in PIC. It's a project that we are doing in cooperation with JBS Foods, food company, global food company, basically, and also with another system production company in the States that called Hanor, in cooperation with the University of Arkansas. What consists in this project is actually 2 trials ongoing. One started 2 years ago, just before or just in the beginning of the pandemic period. We did a trial using a small number of goats. We would love to do a big trial, but it's a university. We don't have a space to work with so many goats. We just use 200 goats total. And basically, our focus was nutrition manipulation, basically adding more fiber, getting a fluff diet, a low density in energy, and low in amino acids, lysine, and also in the phase 2, that means from about 50 kilos above, using lower tryptophan to lysine ratio. Why? To try to control feed intake and reduce growth and reduce body weight at first breeding. So this project still continues. We're moving to the 30th ferry. I mentioned before, we start in 2020, and we still continue collecting information. But this small trial showed that first, it is possible to manipulate and reduce body weight at first breeding. However, it's not a big change. We can reduce, but we cannot reduce more than probably 8 to 10 kilos. Okay, to be honest, this trial shows 7 to 8 kilos. But the results, although it's preliminary, is showing that there is an impact of this slowing down growth during goats and the better performance on productivity. Another trial, there's a second trial, but this is a big trial ongoing. This is a field trial, and with Hanor, we're using more than 2,000 goats, and with the same approach, slowing down growth by nutrient manipulation. I hope in the next year to have more information to share with you. So let's move into talk about gestation, feeding the breeding herd. So in the past, before the year of 16, PIC has a nutrition program for during gestation, pretty much similar as all genetic companies, basically consisting of a flat feeding up to late gestation, and then bump giving in more feed. And the concept behind is, the theory behind is basically giving more feed will adjust their requirement in amino acids to sustain birth weight and to mammary gland developing. However, PIC conducted a series of trials, and even our competitors today, they have research showing that bump feeding does not bring in advantages in birth weight or needed in mammary gland as the majority of nutritionists and researchers thought. So then in the year of 16, we launched the manual with suspending the recommendation to get bump feeding for sows, because there is a negative impact. We observe higher stillborn, heavier sows, more losses during lactation, and also there is one publication that show negative correlation with the retention up to parity 3. So, and PIC continues investigating this area, how we should feed these modern sows. And the focus for the nutrition program launch in 2021 was more related with the body condition, as you can observe here on this graph with colors. So here, let's put a little bigger. We're gonna see that we have one recommendation for thin animals in green that basically is giving more feed to them, checking the wood caliper every 30 days, and they will be able to gain 2 points of caliper and being back to the good body condition. On the red part, we have a flat recommendation. It means a recommendation for about 2 kilos based on a diet that contains about, about the energy that most use in Japan. And this estimated that the sows will gain about 2 points of caliper throughout the entire period of gestation. And the yellow part basically represents the suggestion, the feeding recommendation for fat animals. That means reduction in the index to control their body condition. However, one thing that the investigations and also our observation in the field shows that it's very hard to make sows lose or return to a normal condition when they're fat during gestation. So basically saying that we continues investigating this. Remember before I mentioned that youths are heavier. So in more recently, this is a publication we did this year in 2022 in the American Society of Animal Science. We basically track the body weight from youths and later with the parrots, so I'm going to show in a sequence. But we did an assessment of our feeding program, as you can observe in the graph on the right side. And we can observe that the red line represents the requirement for maintenance, 100%. It means that when I have those boxes above, they're feeding above maintenance. When I have below that red line, it means that sows are feeding below the requirement for maintenance, their energy requirement for maintenance. And what is the conclusion here? At least with that group of sows that was, breeding with 150 kilos on average, they were not be feeding below their requirement for maintenance in the first gestation. But one big mistake that I'm not saying here in Japan, but I'm saying globally, caliper is it's a good tool, it's well disseminated in different countries. But one thing that unfortunately people making a mistake is using caliper in the first gestation. Try to use a caliper in youths. We need to be aware about one important thing. Youths, they never ferret, they have really muscle, they have a different conformation in their body. Remember that caliper is based on angularity between their back. This is spine bone, the muscle, and also the back fat. If we use a caliper in youths, we're gonna make a mistake to read a lot of youths that is just youth, they're muscle, they're heavier. We're going to interpret them as fat because caliper is going to take this youth is fat. And this is a mistake. And a lot of people, what they do when they use a caliper in youths, they interpret it as fat and they cut feed. Then the graph in the left side here represent a reduction in about 200 grams of feed. And we can observe that places or farmers or producers that do this call youths as fat and cutting feeding from them. They're going to feeding in the gray square here or gray rectangle. They're going to be feeding below their requirement for maintenance since the mid of gestation. It is important to refer that or remember that about 30% of their net body gain I'm saying net, but again, not speaking about liter, will happen during the first gestation. When I say net, but again, is in between the first breeding up to their parity 5+. So 30% of the gain between these two periods needs to happen in the first gestation. They're still growing. If we fed them below or too much below their energy requirement for maintenance, we'll compromise their growth and also their development. So by this reason, in the most recent nutrition manual and nutritional materials, we separate the recommendation for sows and gilts, and we decide to put one exclusively to gilts to refer to do not feed gilts below their recommendation that PIC has for ideal sows, like 2 kilos of feed or 5.9 megacals of ME. Why? Because gilts is still growing. Gilts are heavier. We don't want to call gilts as fat and neither thin. They're just gilts. They're heavier. They are heavier because they have a faster growth compared with the past. So in this two graphs here is the same I mentioned before, but before I show the simulation of the feeding program for gilts during the first gestation. Now we put all parrots here, and let's start talking about the graph on the left. The graph on the left in blue, and the title here is the simulation of the PIC feeding program, the current one, 5.9 megacals of ME or 4.4 megacals of net energy. And the red line represents 100% of maintenance. The same concept. If you have those colored box below that line, it means they're feeding below maintenance, above maintenance. And we can observe in this graph on the left that the all P2 plus, all P2 plus means the 30 gestation, they will be fed below maintenance if we feed them only as PIC suggests. So maybe you're going to ask me, are you saying that the feeding program is wrong? I'm going to say the feeding program needs to be adjusted because we created this based on a salt that's not existent anymore. We mentioned before, gilts were bred in on average in 144 kilos. Nowadays, the data is showing 155 kilos on average. However, the information, different than people believe in the past, and this BEM feeding concept doing a super offer like a kilo or more sometimes, the adjustment is really small. On the right side here represent a graph, the same concept, red line, 100% of maintenance, below that line, below maintenance, above that line, above maintenance. What you can observe, if you make a small adjustment, like a 250 grams in our feeding program, we're gonna be allowing all the parrots, almost all parrots, to be fed above their requirement for maintenance. So for this reason, this is the new feeding program. It looks like the same we have before, and it is for thin sows in green. Nothing changed. We continues with the same recommendation. In the red in the center, basically, is the same concept. Feeding them when you have ideal sows read by caliper. Still recommend to feed them 2 kilos or 5.9 megacals of ME, but we made an adjustment in our recommendation. We're saying give 250 grams more feed for the P2 plus in late gestation to adequate their requirement in energy for maintenance. So in the yellow part is the second biggest change in our feeding program. Before, we have a suggestion to feed in as fat, well, like a cutting feed in 200 grams. And now we're suggesting to do not do this neither in early gestation and neither in late gestation. Why? Because in early gestation, cutting feeding and providing it or do not attend to their requirement for maintenance, they will cut performance, they will cut reproductivity, and there is a big chance to return in estrus or also have a lower fairing rate. So, and why not in late gestation? For the same concept I described before. Those sows today are however given too low feeding in the late gestation will not probably compromise their litter growth, because priority is going to be litter growth in late gestation, but might to compromise the performance of that sows in their body. Noted that the majority of trials done to investigating feeding late gestation, they do in one period, and they follow those animals up to subsequent, but they do not do multiple periods. They don't track that to analyze retention. So continues on this. This is a slide to show why we're not recommending cut feeding in early gestation. So early gestation, there is evidence that lower than maintenance will compromise reproductivity. There were going to be a big change to returning in estrus. It means do not continue the gestation. However, given too much feed, and there's systems that still trying to give them a lot of feed to put them back in a good condition. There is some evidence showing that more than 10 megacals of ME per day will also cut performance in the total born and also in the fairing rate. So I mentioned this before, this graph. This graph is one that I mentioned about the body weight, that body weight on the sows herd change. And I show the concept that we're not feeding in accordance to attend to their maintenance. So I will show in the next few slides a comparison between two trials, two projects done using PIC cameras. On the purple side here on my right in this slide, it's a trial conducted by a PhD student at that time, Dr. Laurie Thomas, that today is our repro specialist. She works in PIC, and she did a trial in 2017 to investigate impact of SID lysine during gestation, working from 11 grams up to 18.5 grams per day during gestation. The graph on the left side in blue, it's a trial conducted by my team in the year of 2021 that was published this year in the American Society of Animal Science meeting in June. And they have exactly the same treatments. You can observe it's lysine response during gestation. Just one observation here. The purple one is the trial started on the day 4, and the blue one is started day 30. But I don't expect it to have a big change between those days, because remember, during the early gestation, sows does not gain that much of weight. So in this graph, we observe the body weight for gilts and sows in the beginning of those two trials. And one thing that we can call our attention here is the body weight from the purple one that done in 17 were really 20 and 30% lighter, 20% for gilts and sows, lighter compared with the blue one done last year. So just confirming what I mentioned before, the sows herd is heavier today, okay, compare what we have in the year of 17. And this slide here is the gain between the beginning of the trial up to the day 112 when they were moving to the fairing room. And you can observe in the purple one that sows and gilts, they gain weight. In the blue one, they also gain weight. But basically, they do not gain any gain in their body. It's just gain about liter. If we discount the liter there, multiplying the birth weight times the number of total born, we're going to observe that this body weight gain here, or body weight change, It's not net body weight from sows. It's just liter gain. It means the sows are not getting any changes in body weight, no matter GUTs or sows. So, and we can confirm what happened on the body condition. Look at the purple one, represent responses for back fat. Although there is no difference by treatments, we can observe in the trial done in 70 that in all treatments, sows and GUTs gain back fat during gestation, as expected. However, in the graph on the left side is representing GUTs and sows in the trial done in 2021, and we can observe basically that all treatments are the same, no response by treatment, but sows and GUTs lose back fat. And this is not natural phenomenon. It's basically nothing. It calls our attention, and then we check actually the body weight and we estimate the maintenance, and we clear feed animals below their requirement for maintenance in the trial done in the year of 2021. And confirmed by caliper in the graph in the back that we can observe that sows and GUTs lose caliper scores during gestation. What is telling us? We do not feed in accordance with their requirement. We did a trial in lysine, but we learned that we do not feed their requirement for energy. So in terms of, as observed that in the trial done by Dr. Laurie Thomas in 17, basically she does not observe any improvement in birth weight. We also do not observe any improvement in birth weight in the trial done in the 2021. Stillborn, she observed improvement in stillborn for sows, not for GUTs. We do not observe neither in GUTs or sows. We do not observe any improvement by lysine. So basically, it seems like we did a trial in lysine, but we're learning more on the energy. So the good news, we're starting in, I think in the end of November of 22, we're going to start a new trial with the same treatment, but this time we calculate the body weight on average using the previous measurements we did, and we creating a feeding program with the same treatment, 11 to 18.5 grams, but this time we're providing more energy to make sure that 95% of their animals will receive more than requirement for maintenance. We don't want, we need to do a response for lysine this time, making sure that we're attaining their requirement for energy. So summarizing our gestation feeding recommendation, PIC is still recommending to feeding GUTs not by body condition. Don't use the caliper in GUTs. Caliper is a nice tool, but using caliper in GUTs will create a lot of misinterpretation. We're going to measure good GUTs, strong GUTs, muscle GUTs as fat, and we're going to be leaning to reduce feeding, and this is not good. So PIC does not recommend to feed fat animals neither early gestation or late gestation as fat. I know even using caliper, if they are fat, PIC does not recommend to feeding them, to keep feeding them. If you want to do or try, do after pred check and before the day 9 or late gestation. But be aware that it's not easy to make sows losing condition during gestation. Unfortunately, they are losing during lactation. And also, in the most recent technical materials in PIC, we recommend to make an adjustment in the feeding program in about 250 grams of feed in late gestation for P2 plus. It means in the third gestation, in third gestation above. So this is a summary of some projects in our pipeline. I would like to mention for you and show the objectives. Be aware this project is still on planning or just start. I will refer the first one, that is impact of feeding in late gestation and frequency of feeding preferring. And this trial is special because we're doing with Kembro, but we're doing only in animals with a higher total born. We actually are submitting this treatment only and using information only in cells that has above 18 total born. We're trying to anticipate, investigating the future. I mean, we know that this total born is still growing, and we're trying to do impact of feeding late gestation for these hyperprolific cells. This trial is almost finished, and I hope in the next 3 to 6 months have a summary of this. The second project is a caliper. As I mentioned before, caliper is a nice tool. Is really our best tool today to understand about body condition. However, caliper was developing, collecting information, I think, if I'm not wrong, in the year of 2014 or 2015. It means these cells, these animals, does not exist anymore. And also, if you track the changes in the body composition in the modern Kembro, we're speaking about the Kembro that is more lean. Their muscle it's greater, their lung depth is higher, and the back fat cover is lower. It seems that our caliper tool is amazing, but maybe what the caliper is reading, the sticker's position, maybe might to be changed or repositioned in another category. What I'm saying is caliper will still be a very solid, valid tool, but maybe needed to be adequate. When I say the word maybe, is because this is a trial. We're collecting data on a caliper in different systems to understand about the information pre-ferrying and after wean, and we're tracking subsequent performance. Our goal is creating one caliper score customized for PIC Kembro. The other trial, the 31, is the effect of feeding levels for gilts during their first gestation and impact on the future reproductive performance and mainly focus on retention up to parity 3. This is a 2-year project that we start in April this year. We're still collecting data, but what is our objective? Understanding about this feeding program during the first gestation and how this is associated with cells mortality and cells retention up to parity 3. Not only productivity, but also the retention of these cells. Another project ongoing is impact of bump feeding for fat body conditioned read by caliper. We started this trial, we just finished. We are still analyzing the data, but there is a trial done 2 years ago by one of our partners that it's a small scale trial, but they observe improvements in birth weight when they have bump feeding for fat cells. Then we decide to do repeat the trial, but this time only use fat cells. It means to be part of this trial, the cells need to be reading by caliper as fat. It's only cells, no gilts. We don't call gilts fat. And what happened? Basically, we're submitting 3 feeding levels in late gestation, and our objective is to understand if the fat cells needed to bump feeding or not. I know that it seems like a contradicted bump feeding for fat, but we assume that they're also heavier. Maybe their maintenance is higher. So this trial will be finished in another 3 months. The last one here, it's a project that I mentioned before when I talked about the growth during gestation, but our objective of this project that calls prediction model for body weight at gestation across periods, basically we're using as input the body weight at first breeding to generating body weight throughout gestation accordance with the parents. It means we're going to be able to estimate the body weight from the future sow in accordance with that body weight at first breeding. What is our objective with this? If farm collect information using tape or scales, they can plug this in the model, and they will understand which parent needs to receive more feed to adequate. So it's a kind of going to be more precise in our feeding program. So I would like to say thank you for being a part of this presentation. As I mentioned before, our company is saying never stop improving. We still learn about our genetics. On behalf of PIC Global Nutrition Team, a special thank you for you customers, and a special thank you for ICC for the cooperation and business, and also to allows us to be a speaker in this symposium. Thank you.